Hello, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to this one of our series in Zenergy webinars. My name is John O'Boyle of Zenergy Consulting, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Lorna and Deepak Seth. Before I introduce them, let me just quickly run through, for those of you not familiar with technology or who haven't particularly joined us before. You have an opportunity, and we encourage you to make use of it, to ask any questions you like. There's a question bar in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can put a question in there to any of the organizers or to myself, and I will seek to bring it into the conversation. There's also a hand-raising mechanism. If you put a click inside the hand-raising box, I will get back to you on the chat format. So the idea is to attempt to make this as interactive as possible, but we will be following up with everybody with an email with a recording of the webinar. And as always, if you're interested, you can just reach out to us, info@zenergy.com, and we'll be delighted to respond to your individual needs. Okay, without any further ado, let me first of all introduce Lorna McDowell. And Lorna McDowell is the CEO of Zenergy, the creator and innovator behind Zenergy, and indeed a noted person in the world of systemic transformation. Lorna, how are you?
Very good, thank you, John. Really looking forward to this conversation today.
Excellent. And though Lorna is welcome to all webinars, I think a particular welcome to Deepak, who's joined us from Fort Worth at just before 8 a.m. in the morning. Thank you for doing that, Deepak. Deepak's biography is interesting, and it would take me half an hour to give it justice. But his surname is Seth, and he introduces himself in a very, very innovative and creative way. He says S means strategy, E means execution, T means transformation, and H means high energy. But behind that is a long and varied career in industry and in consultancy with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and I suspect a pretty global number of air miles along the way. Would that be right, Deepak?
Yeah, sure. Greetings, all of you, and it's great to be a part of this webinar. And John, you're very kind.
Great. I know that very well. It just happens to be true. There's nothing wrong to speak the truth. So, Lorna, I'll turn over to you first of all, perhaps to give us some context into what the conversation about digital human approach, and a little bit about Zenergy.
Thanks, John. So, as a business, we're interested in the human aspects of how we change, both individually and especially collectively. So, when we're referring to systemic matters, which is what Zenergy has, I suppose, become well known for, we're really talking about the interconnectedness of everything. And I don't need to tell anybody that, I mean, today we are in profoundly changing times. And our work over the years, it's nearly 20 years now since I founded the company, but over the years it has always been a bit of a live laboratory about the change experience. At the beginning it was very much to do with my own change experience of leaving the corporate world and exploring a very different side of life, in which I got more interested in psychology and eventually led to the development of Zenergy. But the theme of disruption has often been very much part of it, and I myself worked in the tech industry before I started moving into organisational psychological consulting and coaching. So this theme of disruption has always been something which has been with me. And so in exploring this topic today, we really wanted to look at the human aspects in a really human way. So within Zenergy, we look at this interconnectedness of everything, and it's about exploring a fresh perspective, but also renegotiating our relationships with everything. Because we're in such changing times, we can't take the same set of assumptions that we've always had. It calls on each and every one of us to rethink who we are and how we are, and to shift the way we are. So that's a shift in being, a shift in seeing, and a shift in eventually the outcomes that we individually and collectively produce. So that's what we are about in Zenergy, and in doing that, creating a new narrative about it, because you know, when we mention things like technology and digital, there's a lot of struggle often behind those words. So that's what we wanted to really explore today. And about 2 years ago, we started a think tank, if I can loosely call it a think tank, but it was exploring what was digital actually about. And what we realized was that, you know, digital is about far more than digital. Actually, within it is this whole melting pot of stuff which has been unresolved. So to explore everything around digital transformation and how we do it, what it's about, we actually have to be able to work at a deeper level within it. So that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. And I really wanted to bring Deepak into the conversation, as somebody who has worked in the field for so many years and been there, seen it, done it, both in large organisations and smaller organisations and consulting, and you know, that range of experience really gives one, you know, a huge wisdom. So I'm really, really grateful to you, Deepak, for taking the time out to be here.
Thank you.
So Deepak, the world has talked about digital transformation. I mean, it's probably until COVID came along and knocked it off its perch, it was effectively the #1 business conversation that people were happening. So what does going digital actually mean to most organizations today?
Great question, John. And Lorna, thanks for the introduction about Zenergy and about how you approach things. So that was very helpful. So I guess, John, digital transformation, when we look at it, traditionally what people think, or what many organizations have perceived, is it's the way of you bring digital technologies into the company and you assume that a digital transformation has happened. So whatever constitutes digital technologies, so in some cases it may be AI, machine learning, in some other cases it may be mobile interface, whatever, you bring that into the company and you say, you check the box off saying, hey, we are making a digital transformation. So traditionally it has been viewed in terms of the classic people, process, and technology. So you are changing some processes, you're bringing some technology in, and as far as the people part is concerned, most people assume that it is taking reducing headcount or taking cost out and stuff like that. Put them all together and you say digital transformation is happening. Now this is and as I've gone through this journey myself, I found that there is something missing in this. Putting these three ingredients together still does not result in the transformation which companies were expecting. And the assumption is that so which makes one think, and which will come out in this conversation, is that putting these people, process, and technology with digital flavor into a pot does not result in digital transformation because a catalyst is missing. And my point is, and I guess Lorna would agree with that, is that it's the human part which is missing in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's a little like, I think, the change management, another word that has had a number of effects, particularly in the IT space. But realistically, change management is, and this is probably a little unfair in the change management profession, but the preserve of CIOs, the preserve of CTOs, whereby one moves an organization from point A to point B and replaces the processes and technology without adding the people, except looking at the people perhaps through a lens of agile or lean or one of those other improvement principles. So I'd actually argue, I don't know whether you'd agree with me, Lorna, that in fact, if not carefully executed, digital transformation or change management ignores the human factor. So it's not only non-additive, it can actually be a potential negative. So how do you feel about that, Lorna?
I think this is a really fundamental point, because if we look back over time, some of the sort of archetypes around technology and digital have been quite overpowering ones. You know, from everything from kind of RoboCop to Star Wars. You know, there's very strong archetypes associated with technology. And so when we begin to ignore some of the concerns and the fears, that anxiety doesn't just disappear. It actually does something. It becomes, it goes into a place where it starts to create other outcomes. And so paying attention to some of the unconscious impacts is really, really important. So in our hypothesis here, you know, what we're saying is that digital, and indeed to some extent we could include COVID in this as well. COVID may or may not be connected, but the fact is it's a thing. It's a theme in which people are pouring in their anxieties about how life is today. You know, that sense of it's all too much. I'm just trying to keep up. I'm so busy. I haven't got time. I feel wounded from the past. And by the way, we don't just pick up our own past. We pick up the past from generations. And here we are at the threshold of time as well. You know, moving through what has been a very patriarchal society into one which is much more open towards, you know, more feminine principles, and indeed, you know, people looking towards the feminine for, you know, new aspects of the economy. So there's an awful lot of pain associated with digital. And I think that was one of the key points we wanted to make in this hypothesis, is how we deal with that pain is really important in digital. And sometimes when we experience that pain, it's because we haven't reframed the narrative properly. You know, it's almost like a plant that has got too big for its pot, and so we don't know what to do with it. We're not allowing ourselves the growth. So it's really important as we talk about digital transformation, we actually start to talk about the transformation of the human, and that we really pay attention to our psyches. And as we do that we can start to release huge untapped potential. And of course, that has a direct relation to how we innovate as well. Yeah, so this is a really important thing. And part of the challenge, of course, is therefore to make looking at psychology palatable, because a lot of people are very afraid of going a little bit deeper within.
Yes, absolutely. And furthermore, that there is a bit of a fear. Okay, there is the uncertainty. Okay, there's the uncertainty of the potential of AI. There's the uncertainty of the immediate, short-term, medium, long-term future. There's an uncertainty with young people. I see it in my own work, where they are uncertain of what their careers will be in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time. And there's a reluctance to perhaps go into the depth of themselves, and rather than try and do what the world wants them to do where they're calling, for example. It's a very, very deep situation. But if you're in a process where I think we accept that the human has to be put back into the center of how a digital transformation or change management process goes, what in your experience, Deepak, are the opening salvos, or the first thing an organization or a group should think about doing to bring the human back into the debate?
Great question, John. I think one of the biggest things is like everybody knows that humans fear technology, means that since the days of the Luddites destroying the looms and stuff like that. So any new technology comes, humans are scared of technology. But there's another flip side. Technologists often are scared of humans also. So as a technologist, you want like clear, measurable outcomes. You install a software, you write code, and it does something very, very specific. Now, when you start talking about psyche and getting the human into the mix, most technology, it is assumed to be wishy-washy stuff.
Yes.
It's not real. It has got no meat to it, is what many C-suite people sometimes think, or the next layer after that thinks. And it builds upon the same debate which goes on in academia also, like, should humanities be part of what technologists or engineers study, or should it not be part of it? So it's a continued debate which is going on. So coming back to the point is like, if this fear, this mutual fear of humans to technology and technologies to human exists, what is the best way companies can address it? And you put it rightly, asking what can be the opening salvo in a digital transformation. I think one of the key things which is missing is in digital transformation is, if you have to get the human in, I'm saying you need to get the heart in. And what I mean by that is, getting the heart in is that creating a sense of creating a purpose for the digital transformation. Now there's a purposefulness is becoming a strong hate to say the term buzzword. Millennials and Gen Zs are helping us rediscover the need to connect to a purpose. So similarly, digital transformation, the key part which leadership needs to do is establish a clear purpose for the digital transformation. And Lorna, if you want to add to that, and then we can keep going on about it.
Yeah, in fact, I suppose that was one of our insights as well, was that we're moving into the age of purpose, and purpose is the new measurable almost. The extent to which people feel and experience meaning in their work. Yeah, and people don't change because they want to necessarily. They usually change because they have to. But if you want people to change because they want to, it's really important that we feel a sense of purpose. But you can't tell people what their purpose is. And I think that's one of the big mistakes that a lot of organisations make, is that they tell people what their purpose and values should be, and then wonder why people don't engage. And so they tell them more until they listen, and people disengage more until the organisation starts. So we get into this kind of us and them and this great big gap, rather than seeing as something, purpose as something which has to be discovered, and it has to be discovered both on a personal and a collective level. And it's all to do with that sense of calling. And we have an amazing opportunity for that right now. There is so much change in the world, and all of us are affected in small or big ways. And so, the desire to want to be doing something that's going to make a difference, the desire to want to help people to feel better, the desire to want to, it's making us think and feel a lot more about who we are and what we're about and why we even exist. There's a huge amount of existential thinking going on right now. And certainly from some of the leaders I've been speaking to recently, this is really on people's minds. How do we stop just going through the motions and pushing through initiatives and start to listen? There's big stuff going on in the world right now. Pandemic, that was, it was forecasted years ago, but did anybody actually listen? So how do we really tune in and listen to what's happening and bring a new sense of purpose to digital? How can it be the gift that we need right now, rather than being this thing to be really fearful of? And what's the social contract involved in that too? So purpose also brings the question of, so how do we go about working purposefully? Which involves a whole new way of working.
Question is bubbling up in your mind, John.
Yeah, there's a question bubbling up, not only in my mind. Jaspal Badra has come out to us, and very interestingly about your comment about technologists being scared of humans. He made a point that the chief information officer position might be better described as the chief integration officer position, keeping the eye, so bringing the human into it. What you're driving at also, Lorna, is not only that, but that there is a deeper purpose. The work I do with teams, for example, that there is a core need for the team to define its purpose, and the same for the organization to define its purpose. So that it isn't doing this project to make the change, as you say, Deepak, but it's discovering its common purpose. And once that's discovered, then that makes it easier, if you like, I suppose, Deepak, to, if you like, sell the need for digital. But one other comment I'd just quickly make was, if we were sitting down thinking about a change project, we might have a project plan saying it was 2 to 3 years. Okay. Yet in the space of 4 weeks, most governments have introduced pandemic programs through their entire bureaucracy to pay people to keep businesses going. So realistically, they can change at the speed of light if the world calls them to do so.
Mm-hmm.
That underlying purpose can now be given to organizations to energize them, I think, to drive their purpose forward. But anyway, your comment on the digital, comments from Lorna, Deepak.
Hey, so thanks Jaspal for joining in. So he is a visionary by himself. I learned at his feet, so I'm humbled that he has joined. So he has imbued purpose in many organizations. So it's great that he's able to join. Bringing back a story, a shared story of my and Jaspal's experience was in a team which he built. He created that sense of purpose by giving us a mantra called 100% do it, where D stood for delivery, O for ownership, I for integrity, and T for teamwork. So I was part of it like 20 plus years ago, but I have still internalized it. That sense of purpose travels along with me. So yes, Lorna, you made a great point about how that purpose needs to, it's not just one person dictating it and everybody agreeing to it. It is something, so a leader creates the vision. He paints the broad brush strokes, and then others have to step in and then fill up the details, kind of thing, and then imbue that purpose into themselves. But this is the part which is scary for technologists, and where there is help needed, because much of this is because it's not easily measurable, unless means now tools can come which can help people measure that. So that's where the help from experts is needed to understand how this human part can be brought into the digital transformation.
So readiness to change, for example, how ready people are to make that change in themselves is a very, very, to me, is a core concept. Some humans are open to it, and some, as you said about the Luddites, are theoretically only there, if not to slow it down, then potentially even to destroy it. So the attack to change can come from a human resistance, a natural one, as well as a systemic resistance. So once you have purpose done, then Lorna, so this is, the opening salvo, as I said, once you have the purpose of an organization and that the need for change as such, what do you think the next step would be in terms of getting people conscious to the journey of change and transformation?
So I just want to kind of come back on something which Deepak said about how do you measure purpose. Purpose isn't just something that you do at the beginning. It's a continual check-in point. And that in starting to measure something like that, there are very distinct measures already. So it shows up, a lack of sense of purpose shows up in people walking with their feet. It shows up in projects which are delivered late. It shows up in conversations that get stuck. And it shows up in toxic relationships which block stuff. So there are plenty of ways to measure how purposeful people feel, apart from a pulse survey which says, how purposeful do you feel today in your life? This is a whole new leadership spectrum, and I think this is the point we're trying to make. The kinds of ways of leading are completely different. It's much more about understanding the nature of tensions and the nature of relationships. So how do you host conversations that enable us to talk about purpose in a useful way, and for people to connect that meaning to the project? How do you create a bigger vision? You're not just creating a product for a company, let's say, if you're trying to create a digital product, but actually, how's that going to change the world? How are people actually doing something which is going to make the world a better place? I've got a 23-year-old daughter who's incidentally our marketing manager these days, and she's absolutely passionate about changing the world. And her generation will not. They won't settle for less. Okay, they may have the youth at one level, but on the other, they have to manage the world that we're leaving. And it is can we get more serious about this stuff and understand that the tensions are real and we have to work with them? So you talked there, John, about the people that are slower to change and difficult to get on board. Well, actually, how can we understand that part of what they bring in that tension is somehow useful? Because if we were all gung-ho and skipping into the future, we might actually miss some good checks and balances. So the mere fact that we judge laggards can be really toxic, because that just creates more resistance. And sometimes that's to do with a personal difficulty with change. It could be that someone's had a really poor learning experience at school. So a big part of change is helping to inspire people to relearn how they learn. And that's about relationships. I think we can all remember maybe teachers or bosses, as you just mentioned, Deepak, that you've had in the past who really shaped you. These are the people that create the crucibles in which we can transform. So, this work of leadership is all about the relationships. So it's not just about finding calling and purpose, it's also about how do you build learning relationships and help people to relate things in different ways. So for me, that's a fundamental in this work.
Yeah. Also, and we have some comments here, a comment from Jerome, who talked about the fact that whilst the organization's purpose may be a certain thing, the individual's purpose may be quite different. How, he wonders, do we reconcile this inherent contradiction between, you're giving the example of a young person who wants to work but also wants to sort of see the world saved, and the corporate purpose, which may be a lot less altruistic. So there's a contradiction between the individual, thank you, Jerome, and the organization's purpose. And that must be one you've come across a lot, Deepak.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jerome. Thanks for the question. And this is how does the organizational purpose align with the purpose of the individuals which make up the organization, and vice versa. But it's a two-way street. The individual sense of purpose who make up the organization also influences the corporate purpose, because ultimately the corporation is serving individuals of that kind out in the marketplace. To give an example, for example, means as more and more people have got engaged about, concerned about, or developing a sense of purpose around plastic waste, for example, circular economy has become a way which corporates have changed their purpose. So it's not just manufacturing plastics in whatever way they can so that they can be dumped and they can clog the ocean. They have changed their sense of purpose to bring the circular economy piece into it, how they can be brought back and recycled, kind of thing. So that's an example of where, now in the first stages, some of it may sound like lip service, because corporations try to pay lip service to whatever the sense of purpose is arising amongst the consumers and people. But say it many times, often, that lip service starts becoming, then changing into true behaviors also. So circular economy has become a reality now. So these days, means for corporations, there is what I say, they have to deal with what is called the public, what I am saying is a public trifecta. So there is public perception, public trust, and public policy. So the first thing is, means how does the public perceive them? And public means the individuals which make up their company also. The second is the public trust, means they have to win the public's trust. And third is both these things have a big influence on public policy, which is the government and administration and stuff like that. So in many of these cases, if the individual sense of purpose and the public sense of purpose has an influence on the public policy part of things, which forces companies to make the changes. So it's an interesting dynamic which is in play.
So you're actually saying that the three interrelate.
Obviously, yes, the three I mean, there are arrows going back and forth in all directions, because nothing. A corporation cannot exist in vacuum. Individuals cannot exist without corporations, and the government has to interplay with all these things. Just one more point before we may switch gears here is that so COVID has brought, for example, these things about, say, vaccines and drug development into a top of mind for everyone. Now, over the years, over the centuries and decades, means a clear-cut process has been established for that. So a drug is going to get released in the market. It needs to go through a set of clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, animal trials, this trial, that trial, before it gets provided to the people. Why we do that? Because we know that these drugs or vaccines can work either way. They can work for good or they can work for bad, and we want to have a clear sense of what the good is and what the bad is, and we can put it as indicators and counter indicators on the label kind of thing. But in terms of what has happened with technology is that people, because the force of technologies is such that the assumption is all technology is good. So as soon as everything code is written, a company comes up with something, okay, let's release it in the market because it has to be good. And Google had started with the mantra, do no good and do no harm kind of thing. But now companies are also realizing that it is not necessary that all technology is good. So Arvind Krishna of IBM just sent a note to Congress recently saying IBM is withdrawing from the facial recognition market because they don't think the technology is mature enough. So those kind of, Lorna had brought up the point about checks and balances. So those kind of checks and balances, I think, will emerge in the technology field too. And as a corollary to that, would become part of the digital transformation experience journeys within the companies also. I spoke a long time there, sorry.
No, that's entirely fine. I find your public trifecta very interesting. The link between companies realize that they can't exist in a vacuum, they have to work with themselves, and they have to work in a public policy. So, for example, Lorna, we've been looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, which a client is promoting, and beginning to move it away from a corporate social responsibility position, which is, if you like, a company is seen to be doing something, to move it towards a situation in which it is part of a balanced scorecard, that the company is really delivering its community obligations whilst working within that environment. So that is a link, I suppose, to your corporate link to policy. I think, Lorna, that's a good example of where a deeper purpose for an organization becomes manifest.
Well, I think it's also, it's a deeper journey for society. Deepak, you spoke about trust, and one of the difficulties in attaining policy coherence is that there is a lack of trust between different sectors, organisations of all kinds, and certainly the great divide between sectors, because they speak a different language, they have a different way of working. And you mentioned the sustainability goals there, John, and indeed we have launched a project called Clusters, which is called Brainstorming for Game Changers, but it's all about promoting dialogue across sectors and to create spaces and ways to coach different groups through the way of talking to people across sectors around big issues. Because the sustainability goals actually can only be solved if all sectors actually work together. They can't be solved by one organisation or organisations ticking boxes saying, well, we've achieved the goals, because that's nonsense. This is why society must learn to work together for the greater good. But until we can actually learn to have relationships with each other across sectors, nations, governments, and find a language and realise that we actually all share one world, and that we can work in a way that, we don't need peacemakers to keep peace anymore, but we just understand that we've all got to be compassionate and work towards this. It's a huge ideal, of course, However, the scientists tell us we're in trouble. So we might want to wake up, and digital may have an awful lot to offer here. It may pose threats as well. So hadn't we better wake up and find out what we're doing and how to do it? We're bringing this back down to the organizational level, and I want to just pick up again on trust. Trust happens through having difficult conversations and creating relationships. And so often, not only does the human side get forgotten in a business process, but even more the difficult stuff gets avoided. So, the person that we don't speak to, the person that gets scapegoated, the department we don't speak to, all of these things create blockages in the system, and it spreads like a virus in a creche. So we have to get better at creating relationships in order to build trust and create the spaces and places for conversations, and learn to think long term and more interconnectedly. So there's an awful lot to learn there. And I think, the point I want to make is this is no longer the domain of people working in psychology. And this is not a need to go for therapy. This is actually something that everybody needs to learn. There is no exceptions. We all need to learn to do this because we're all sharing in the one planet.
Yeah, you've touched on also, I think, culture, the culture of the organization, the culture of how it works. And interestingly, we're getting a lot of comments on that question. Mike Rochelle, I believe the Rosetta Stone for understanding is the culture and cross-cultural virtues. What do the panel think about that? And Jaspal has come back to thank you, Deepak, for your reminding of the 100% do it. And also said, what's really looking for is the triple bottom line. However, planet and people components has been overshadowed by profit. So two things there. The cultural piece and how important that is. And then secondly, has this triple bottom line idea, which seems rather fanciful, has the profit motive replace the other two, and are we only playing lip service to things like sustainable development goals? So who wants to take culture and who wants to take those pieces?
So I'll start with the profit one. So and interestingly means in past conversations with Lorna and others, this came up, this comes up all the time, and where my line of thought was going was that so the focus is on profit, the focus is on money. So that's the way our business environment has evolved. But what do corporations, and this is at a slightly philosophical level, what do people look at money for? Why do people need the money? Most people would say that they want money so that they can be happy. Okay, so if assume that, so if happiness is the goal and money is the medium to get the goal, is there other ways by which, if there are other ways to be happy, would people be willing to take that path instead of just following the money path? So if corporations think that, what, our object, and money itself is not, so the question which I may get is, hey, money is real and happiness is not real. How do you quantify happiness? Well, money is not real either. Means you pick up any currency note and it will say, I promise to pay the bearer. Now what promise, what is it actually? Nobody knows. So an abstract thing was translated into this piece of paper or coin, and we all understand it. The only reason why happiness is not, we don't have a currency is because we don't have a currency for that yet. Now assume that there is a currency for happiness. I'm sure people would rather get paid in that currency rather than this currency. But this is too philosophical. The point is that some of the aspects, and I think corporations are very, very tuned with that. So many of the social causes which organizations pick up is only because they realize that while they may be making money for their stakeholders, they are not making people happy. And they realize, because the leaders in companies are also people, they know that, okay, there are certain causes which are dear to the people, whether it's environment, whether it is racial equality, whether it is things of that sort. They are near and dear to the people. They contribute to the people's happiness, and that is why organizations do it. But what is missing is a framework which can deliver them consistently in a very objective way with measurable KPIs like money or is done right now. Lorna.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great point. And Lorna, culture.
Yeah. So I think this is a really, really interesting topic. You know, what we think is the goal is usually not the goal. Life is a continual journey to find its meaning, and there's very few people that would stand at the end of their life and say, I wish I'd made more money, but they might say, I wish I'd made more time to be happy or appreciated certain things more. So, you know, when we start to see life in a different way, we start to value things in a different way, and I think that's part of what Deepak is saying around the search for happiness. And, you know, this search around the greater good. So if an organisation is making profit, and I think there's nothing wrong with making profit, the question is who and what for. So I think what we need to stop is the judgment as whether making a profit is good or bad. Actually, it's necessary in order to have a certain level of health. It's how it's being used and for what, and is that serving a greater good? And I want to just kind of pick up on something here, which is, I think, a cultural difference, which Deepak and I have discussed recently in exploring the difference between East and West. And we were talking about teamwork and the extent to which in Western cultures we tend to be much more individualistic. You know, go and make your fortune, and you know, it's a survival of the fittest. Where in India it's much more around the collective. And you spoke, Deepak, around the experience of cubicle dwelling in in the West is, you know, one person can get very, very isolated and become quite unhappy because they're trying to struggle with a problem and they haven't got a team necessarily helping them. So that person can actually fail in isolation and nobody knows. Whereas in India, you get a problem and all of a sudden you've got a collective of people all around the cubicle on one screen trying to solve it. So, you know, we've got to stop judging one as being right or wrong. The point is that we need to understand that we need a balance of all things. And I think what we've got out of balance in the world that we've had, and that's why people are feeling overwhelmed. You know, and if digital can help us get into more balance, if we can find a way to balance by really slowing down to think more and widely and more deeply around what it is we're actually doing with the technology, and to get more people involved in conversations around it, then we're going to bring people with us. But you can't just have few people having conversations in isolation and running ahead, because it leaves everybody behind. So I'm bringing it back to the need to have quality conversations and quality interconnected thinking, and as a way to bring people forward.
Yeah, and interesting about judgment and judgments. Katrina Egan makes a comment on judgment by calling people Luddites, which I think we both did, you and I, Deepak, as a historical and anachronism. We make them the other, and these are exactly the people who we will need to deliver on digitalization. So there's a mind shift required, and I think perhaps hidden in that is the mind shift is not just of the individuals, it's of the management consultants like us who are discussing this. You know, if people have different views, okay, they're not Luddites, right? And we mustn't depict them as such. So Katrina is putting a hand out on that one. Good point.
Yeah, that's a great point, and sorry if it came across that way, because I was using it more in the historical context of that particular group in that era kind of thing, not as a generic term to be applied to anybody who's not agreeing with a change. And the thing is, all these terms which we say about people, suppose somebody is slow to change, somebody is fast to change. All of us carry all those traits within us. So I may be the fastest person about digital transformation or whatever, but there may be other aspects of me where I'm slow to change. So my wife may point 101 things about me where I'm a Luddite, so as to say. So it's all of them exist in all of us kind of thing. So there's no us, them as far as making these journeys are concerned.
Jasper follows up about the importance of the triple bottom line. As Paul Poman, who till recently was the helm of Unilever, shows, Wall Street can be brought in line by a visionary CEO who puts value creation through a sustainability lens as a central plank of their offering. Projects profits will in fact be enhanced by companies which use Planet First. It will help them to differentiate and greater success and therefore greater rewards. I couldn't agree with that more, because the cave you fear to enter hides the treasure you seek, as Joseph Campbell said. This is the very thing that people wish to do, and sometimes they need to stop. That's the lens. The lens is we must maximize shareholder return, but shareholder return does not only mean finance. I do love your idea of having currency on happiness. I think that's certainly worth looking at in greater length, how we measure happiness and satisfaction. But that's key. We can measure a balance between corporate growth, human growth, and planet growth, and it's been talked about a lot.
There are plenty of ways to measure. It's actually getting them into an official agenda. And I've heard from several CEOs and people working with analysts at the moment that the shareholders, the analysts are starting to ask, what are you doing about culture and how are you measuring it? And how are you living it? Not just how you're measuring, but how are you living it? Now, sometimes people don't necessarily have the answers. And the analysts themselves need to ask themselves that question too. So all of us need to ask those questions about how we're living this authentically, and really to be all very authentic around what we're talking about here. It is a leadership transformation. It is a personal journey and a collective journey, not something you're going to get from just reading a book. This is the time to actually step back and think about how we are being and how we are holding ourselves accountable, how we're getting involved in making a difference, and how we're getting involved in perhaps working with other sectors and ways that we're not familiar with. This is why I think digital is far more than just about digital. It's not just the domain of CIO. This is for all of us to begin to take stock of how we were being and to hold ourselves accountable in new ways. And be in that uncertainty. And I think that's one of the things that holds people back, is that it's not necessarily understanding what the uncertainty is about, and maybe not having the support for a bit of a personal journey around this too. So going through COVID, going through change, maybe people are afraid about losing their jobs at the moment, but not necessarily having a place where they can actually make sense of what's happening and put a more positive frame around it, because there are plenty of positives if we start to reframe, and also be more comfortable in the uncertainty and to deal with it in a different way. So, and I think this is where, in terms of working with culture, purpose, and leadership, leaders need to engender this kind of conversation and make places to talk about these things, not just in town hall meetings, but in one-to-ones. It requires its own process around it, and I suppose that is something that we do at Zenergy, is around helping leaders to make that shift, but also helping them to design the very processes that are actually going to make that kind of stuff work, and to make it real, because it's a change in gear. It's a different.
And Mike Rochelle comes in on a very good point on a very similar question about measurements. He says perhaps we need to change the profitability measurement, dropping quarterly targets and looking long term. Hence the balanced scorecard perception, which was certainly in vogue for a while in the 90s, but seems to have dropped off the agenda somewhat sadly. This will drive the opposite behaviour, from visionary CEOs. And we also need visionary boards and visionary investors as well. And then he comes back with, as a follow-up, the whole system is out of balance, and the whole system needs to be tweaked. So there is there's a clear trend here that there's enthusiasm and view for this. But what I want to ask both of you is, so you've talked a lot about what needs to be done, okay, and who needs to be involved. My next question for you is, what practically is the next thing that organizations and consultants such as ourselves advising them need to do to balance this digital transformation and the human? What practically is the next thing we need to do?
I'll let Lorna go at that first, but before that, I want to give a shout out for Mike Rochelle. Hey, Mike, thanks for joining in. Great questions. You bring a wealth of experience and depth on these issues. So thanks for joining in. Hey, Lorna, go ahead.
Yeah.
So there's a few insights I got here, but I think the main thing I want to say is around making formal time and space for thinking about things. There's a real need to shift towards thinking towards the long-term outcomes. At the moment, everybody has been stuck, well, largely everybody's a generalization, but so many people are stuck in crisis and short-termism. And so, leaders need to think about how they're going to accelerate out of crisis by creating a different kind of environment to do this work, which is involving long-term thinking and becoming future ready, which may involve, rethinking what you measure, rethinking how you approach things, how you lead. And so the change leaders need to actually go through their own personal transformation journey in order to know how to lead others. This is really important. You can't take people somewhere where you've never been before yourself. Otherwise, you're just inauthentic, and no one's going to trust you. So get real. This is the time, leaders, to actually get real about yourselves and invest in your own personal development, and not just stand on the edge of the fence and wonder whether you're going to do it or not. Take the leap. Do it now, because if you're going to lead tomorrow, people need to trust you and they need to believe in you, and you need to do this. There is no short way through it. You have to go through the journey. So that's really, really important. And then, after understanding how to create the human processes, and here I'm talking about conversational spaces, learning journeys where people can start to make sense of what's happening, create a bigger vision for what's happening, and pay attention to their own actions and reactions. And all of that will feed into a lot of other societal good, around particularly stuff around the social unrest and so on. We need to come through this together somehow. And, there are aspirations of leaving nobody behind, but we have to understand how to be with each other. So I think practically, leaders need to get on the journey and not necessarily need to have all the proofs and answers before they get on there. This is about questing and journeying into an uncertain space. And yes, there will be more failures before we get there. But you know what? That's how we learn, if and only if we take the time and space to learn from history and to learn from what goes wrong. Mm-hmm. And a lot of innovation teams, I think Deepak and I actually discussed this at the beginning, people do not take the proper time for reflecting on the lessons of the past and moving into a better place of insight and understanding between them. We have a lot more to do on that yet. Anyway,
Okay, so I'm going to summarize here a bit, because we are coming a little bit towards the end, but I think what you're saying, Lorna, is that the start of this process is the individual and the leader looking at themselves and putting themselves through the type of mindset change, I suppose, that will lead digital transformation, okay? We've talked about the culture within the organization that leader has to inculcate and live. We've talked about the need to marry that culture with the organizational goals and link them to the public and governmental policies, so that in fact the overall happiness of the organization and the individuals within it are that. But I can't let you go without going back to the next practical steps, okay? So yes, the individual needs to move as a leader, and yes, the team needs to move. But for those people who are in an organization who perhaps aren't as conscious of this, okay, what is the first practical step? You've talked about conversations, for example, to the start of it, Lorna. They need to see their leaders and teams take that says, okay, I'm taking this change. This is not fearful. This is something that's going to lead us to a better place. To both of you, one practical thing you'd leave people today as a first thing they should do. Maybe we've covered it, but I want to put it out there. Deepak.
I think the first thing is means a leader will need to accept means that things there is something which needs to change. So that acknowledgement will need to come in them that, hey, something is not right. The project is failing. It's not just because the people, process, and technology have screwed up. There is something deeper, systemic, organizational into it. So the first thing is they have to acknowledge that there is value in doing something. So that's the first thing. Second thing is they would have to lean into it. Means they can't step away from it. They will have to lean into it. The third thing would be they would have to make the plan. Means once they have leaned in, they have to play all out. So once you embark on this journey, means you have to play all out on it, and then they have to celebrate the successes which will come along the way of this journey. And finally, as Lorna was mentioning, means they'll have to give a lot of time for introspection, course corrections, what went right, what went wrong, kind of thing. So acknowledge the thing, lean in, play all out, and celebrate the successes, and finally means introspect. So that 5 points in a nutshell.
Okay, Lorna, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think one of the first things is to realize you can't do this on your own. We learn by learning with others and in relation to others. So for the leader for whom this is completely new, I think the first step would be get a coach, at least to understand yourself and to understand some of the concepts and to tease it out and to work through it. The second step would then be to work with your own team. And again, a coach can help you do this around creating the space for the conversations where people can start to share their sense of how they see things, sense of purpose, what the needs, the concept of happiness, and also what needs to improve. And the third thing I think is that the different stages to this journey. There's a part which is kind of really trying to assess what's happening now and to maybe mend a few holes and gridlocks that have got in the way and created blockages. So there's a bit about just trying to map where things are right now before you can even begin the journey of real transformation. But that's a really cathartic piece. It's very, very healing. And as I said, there's no way through it. There's no way over it. you have to go through it, but trust that it will be a really, really energizing conversation, even if it feels difficult to begin with. And then the second stage is about creating a better vision of what the future is about. You've got to inspire people. You've got to want to go where you're taking them, and in doing that, listen to concerns about it and the dreams about it, but also go outside of where you are now and sense what's going on outside of you. I can't tell you the number of times that we work with organisations in this, and they've had no time to go and really discover what's going on in their own market, let alone outside of their own market. And so, there are some really exciting ways of doing that these days. And indeed, from the learning journeys that Zenergy organises for our clients, that's precisely what we do. We create space for this journey. The third bit then, after doing the discovery, is around, how do you prototype new ways? How do you bring that real sense of innovation and creating a new world together? And it's both in a little bit intimidating at times, but it's also really stimulating and exciting. And that's when you get to ambition. And an ambition is not worth having unless it's a courageously big one right now. And with allegedly 10 years to get our planet into some form of balance, then we don't have 100 years. We need to get a bit more courageous, and we need to grow up. And as somebody said to me recently, we have the technologies to solve an awful lot of our issues today as a race. The trouble is we do not have the mentality or the morality that has kept up with where we need to be. We really need to accelerate our thinking and our being in order to use our brains and our humanity in a different way. We are going into new times, and in some ways, some people would argue that actually we're starting to catch up with millennia of years ago, when actually there were more intelligent civilized races that knew a lot more than we know now. So we have the opportunity of a golden age if we choose to move towards that infinite possibility, but we had to get out of our own way first and actually allow the untapped potential. I'll stop there because I'm
Well, listen, great summing up by both of you, and I want to thank you for today. A couple of comments to finish. Mike Rochelle says, everyone needs to be fully conscious, not asleep at the wheel. We are at an inflection point where this is possible. We just need to do it. Jessbal signs off by saying, thanks for a really thought-provoking and inspirational discussion. The time we as a species are at an inflection point. So further things to do here. Thank you very much for attending. Everybody who has attended, as I said at the beginning, we will follow up and send you a copy of the webinar. In the meantime, if you want to take a look at some of the services we offer, we have systemic transformation as an intervention and organization. We have our OCT program, which will help individuals and organizations take the journey. The team performance coaching program, which helps teams do the same thing. Clusters, which deals with the greater good and the things that we've really talked about. And please do feel free to reach out to us or log on to zenergy.com. If there aren't any last minute things, and I think Lorna might be wanting to squeeze one in before the bell.
Just wanted to make a point that if anybody is interested in further training on this, we are currently onboarding 3 cohorts for our systemic culture transformation experience, which is for both leaders, consultants and coaches who want to understand more about how to facilitate these learning journeys. So we have cohorts in US, Europe, Australia, India, and there's one happening near you, wherever you are in the world. So
okay.
It's largely online. Get in touch.
Okay. Thank you, Lorna. Very great thanks to you, Deepak. Peace to you. And we very much hope you will keep in touch with us in Zenergy. Thanks to everybody saying, this is John O'Boyle, now signing off from this Zenergy webinar, and we will talk to you all again. Thank you very much.
Bye.